Welcome to the Killer Frogs Killer Minute, a Fan Nation college football podcast. It's a weekly show coming your way, brought to you by KillerFrogs.com. I'm Brett Gibbons, and I'm joined by our editor, our leader, Barry Lewis. Barry, there's no person I would rather have on the first episode of this college football podcast than you. Thank you for joining me, and how have you been?
Hey, Brett, thank you. I've been great. It's great seeing you. This is going to be fun, and thank you for having me be on the first one.
Of course. Great. I want to start with some of our backgrounds everybody's new here. If you're not new to Killer Frogs, you are new to the show because this is a new show for 2023. I just kind of wanted to get into, your TCU background, your college football fandom, your ties to Killer Frogs, all those things. Barry, who are you? How did you end up here? Let everyone know who they're listening to today.
Well, that's a mouthful. Jim Wacker went to TCU the same year that I went to TCU. So I'm not going to say a number, but it's been a few decades ago. So I came to TCU out of high school, and I've never left the Fort Worth area since then. So Fort Worth is my home. I grew up in Oklahoma City. I have diehard Sooner parents. My parents to this day are still diehard at 84 years old. My mother will talk anyone and win any sports argument, period, especially if it's talking about her Sooners and stats and anything like that. So all of my fandom came from her. It was hard for her to send her boy to Texas, but she got over it and sent me, and then my sister 2 years later. So on what we're going to talk about tonight, my connection there is, so I grew up in a Big 8 conference and came to TCU in the heart of the Southwest Conference. So two conferences that have completely gone away, but interesting where those 17 teams now are in the different conferences that they're all sitting in. So that's kind of fun. So I've huge TCU fan, whatever the sport, have been for years, lived through the bad times, have been fortunate for the last 25 years to have the good times too that we've had. This last year was an incredible ride for us on the football season, but it's also been fun in other sports as well over the years. 2.5 or a year and a half ago or so, when Sports Illustrated Fan Nation approached Killer Frogs and was looking to launch the Fan Nation page for TCU, the people at Killer Frogs started looking and saying, well, we got to write a lot of content. We got to know people that can write. We got to know people that like TCU sports. And just through some mutual connections, I got connected with Ryan Zeller, who's the owner of Killer Frogs. And someone said, talk to Barry. He loves TCU sports. He loves to write. And he's the one to talk to. So I was one of the original ones that Ryan talked to. And when we launched on September 14th, 2021, I was right there and I've been here for the whole ride since.
And Barry, we got connected through another mutual friend who has been on this website before, on camera, on podcast. I've talked to him. One of my good friends, Andrew Baus of College Football Tour, linked me up with the Killer Frogs team in October of 2021. Boy, it's really been that long. Right. And I've been with the team ever since. So I have you on again. You said you're one of the originals, lifelong TCU fan. Like I said, no person I'd
not
rather.
Lifelong.
Well. Long time TCU fan.
Yeah.
And really, seriously, really nobody I'd rather have on this first episode with me here. So today we are going to be talking about the hot topics, the off-season stuff. It's June right now when this is coming out. It's the doldrums of the college football offseason. So we're talking college football realignment, what we know, what we're speculating, what people are talking about. We're talking NIL, name, image, likeness. Probably going to get some people stirred up. I know there's a lot of different opinions out there. And also the expanded playoff that's coming in 2024. And this coming season, 2023, is kind of when it all kicks off. The first kind of major shift in the sport that we've seen since, the Big East broke up and when TCU actually moved over to the Big 12. That was kind of the last time we had this major realignment. But 2023, we're seeing some big changes. So I wanted to start right here in the heartland of the Big 12 and the conference that TCU has just, taken by storm last season. We're getting 4 new members here: BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. We kind of know their scape in football. BYU has seen a lot of successful seasons lately, some 10-win seasons. They made a lot of bowl games. Cincinnati The first group of 5 team to ever make the college football playoff is coming over. Houston won 12 games in 2021. UCF, we all know, the 2017 undisputed national champions of college football, as they went undefeated, even though Alabama might have actually won that one. But, 4 solid football programs. But it's not just football. I want to talk on other sports really quick because, Barry, one of the things that you do and really well with us at Killer Frogs here is you make sure that we're shedding light and we're covering all of the sports. You talk about rifle at TCU. You're talking about equestrian at TCU. All the volleyball, beach volleyball, all those other sports. And so I kind of want to touch on some of these other schools, and we'll have a lot more in-depth look at them, especially football later on. But BYU, besides football, they bring a really strong men's soccer team, a really strong women's cross country team, a women's racquetball team, which I believe is club. I don't know if it's rec or club, but they do bring some prowesses over there. Cincinnati, historically good basketball program. We know that. They've made Final Fours in the past. And actually their dance team has 5 national championships. I don't know if you know this. You might, and it's something you should know. Their mascot is a nationally renowned dancer, wins like national championships for the past 3 or 4 seasons. And in order to be the Bearcat mascot, you have to be like this nationally renowned dancer. I learned that when I went to a Cincinnati game this year. So just know that Super Frog is going to have some competition because, we love Super Frog here, but the Cincinnati Bearcat, pretty good at what they do.
Okay.
Houston, also historically good basketball program. We know that 80s. They had some Final Four runs there. Men's golf, interestingly, 1950s to 1980s, won 16 national championships. So
I saw that when you sent that, and I was like, wow, that's incredible.
Well, there's a lot of good golfers from Texas, and the PGA right now is in their full swing playing in Texas. Scotty Scheffler, Jordan Spieth, those kind of guys coming out of Texas, very good golf state. And then UCF, as I mentioned, they don't have a lot of accolades in the championship territory, but the 2017 football national championship that they do hang in their stadium. So, but football is the one that drives the revenue train. So that's what we're really going to focus on today. What are your overall thoughts on these new teams coming in to the Big 12? Do they pose a threat? Are you excited? Kind of, what's your feelings on it?
I'm excited about it. I think it's going to add some new opportunities for all of the teams in the Big 12. 3 of these 4 from a TCU perspective, and I think I am right in saying this, but can't really say for sure. I think TCU is the only team in the existing Big 12 that can claim 3 of those as past conference opponents. So we had Houston through the years of the Southwest Conference. We had Cincinnati when we all were together in the Conference USA, and then BYU, we shared the time in the Mountain West together. So the Mountain West years with BYU, that was a great rivalry with TCU, especially in football. And you had BYU, you had Utah, and you had TCU, and those were the 3 dominant schools. I think that's going to bring some new excitement, and I think that's the other schools in the Big 12 will get to experience that. I enjoyed those games, and I look forward to having them back. The one thing I regret the most during the time that we shared with the Mountain West is I never made it to Provo, and I want to go to Provo. I want to go to Provo for a football game. I want to go to Provo for a baseball game because those views at both of those stadiums just look absolutely incredible. So we travel to Waco, we travel to Austin, we travel to Norman, we travel to Stillwater. Those are easy trips for us. Give me somewhere new. Give me somewhere new that we can go every other year or every few years. So I'm excited about that. I'm also excited that the Big 12 took action when the Big 12 did and got those 4 teams. Because once, what was that, summer of 21, when OU and Texas dropped the bomb that no one saw coming, but really did see coming. But I mean, how you could argue that. But it did hit unexpectedly, and there was a few weeks of what's going to happen to the Big 12. Are we going to even survive? Are we going to go back and be worse than the journey we were when we got kicked out of the Southwest Conference? And having lived through that roller coaster, I didn't want to see that again. So I'm happy that the Big 12 acted when they did, took in these 4 teams, And now you've got Commissioner Yormack that's not just sitting down and saying, okay, this is what we're at. He's out there trying to get the Big 12 to be a leader. So I'm excited about that, to see what it's going to lead to in the future.
I actually didn't know that TCU and BYU had this long storied rivalry, I suppose. Talk a little bit more about that. Like what was it like? What do you think it might be like upcoming?
They were some intense shootouts, especially, towards the was it the 2009, 2010, the Rose Bowl season with TCU. I that's 13 years ago, but I'm thinking it was like a 52-51 TCU BYU game that year. So just I don't know what it was, but we were in the Mountain West. I can't remember their history, if they came in right around that same time. It was just a great time, and it was a we had gone on such a conference roller coaster. You got thrown to the curb when the Southwest Conference disbanded. Then we had to go to the WAC. Then we went to the Conference USA. Then we go to Mountain West. And finally, by the time we got to Mountain West, we were like, all of a sudden, we were the team. And we came in there with some history and the team to beat. And I think it was the BYUs and the Utahs that were like, whoa, let's fight this out. And it was just a great few years. And so it was 2005 to 2011. So 6 years of that rivalry.
And a little bit of history on that rivalry. TCU leads the all-time series 6-5, so it is really tightly contested. But TCU has won the last 4. So BYU got off to a 5-1 start. They've been historically really good at football. They put out a lot of really good players, NFL players, Hall of Famers have come from there. And they started off with the 5-1 lead, and then starting in 2008, 09, 10, and 11, TCU won all those. Bronco Mendenhall and Gary Patterson taken.
What was the 2010 score? How close was I?
I believe you are thinking of the 2011 score is the 38-28 score. The other ones are more lopsided in TCU's favor. But close games, 2007, 27-22, BYU did edge out TCU in Provo. But again, this 6-5 overall score, like that's a pretty legitimate rivalry there. So I didn't know that. I'm excited for that. I'm actually more excited to see BYU here in the Big 12 upcoming than I was before. If you had to pick of the 4 teams, and I don't just mean in the next 5 years, say project 7, 8, 9 years down the road, of these 4 teams, which of them is going to fare the best in the Big 12 in your opinion?
In the Big 12 or in Big 12 football?
Big 12. Let's say football, specifically football. Yeah.
Let's go Cincinnati. And I say that just because they have the most recent successful history of this 4. And I think they're riding their wave right now. And from what they got from last season, I mean, even though they've lost the coach, they've still got the momentum, they've still got the crowd, they've still got the resources. I think that's going to be to their benefit as they come into a conference like the Big 12. And I look at it as just as TCU did, and as TCU benefited almost immediately in the Big 12, just two seasons post that incredible Rose Bowl season.
Yeah, sure. I like that. I like that answer a lot. I like I'm not saying they're going to do the best, but I kind of like the trajectory that Houston is on, because before they were losing out on recruiting battles to Texas A&M, they're losing out to UT, and they're still going to lose some of those recruiting battles. They are, because it's the SEC. Well, Texas down the line, the SEC is going to be a little bit different. But I don't know if, and maybe this is blasphemous to say on a TCU sponsored podcast, but I don't know if Houston is going to lose out on a lot of these recruits to TCU for recruits saying, no, I want to play in the quote unquote Power 5. I want to play on a bigger scale. Now, all of these recruits from Houston, which is one of the hottest recruiting beds in the entire country, maybe think of, well, I can stay home. because I'm going to play at Oklahoma this coming year. I'm going to be able to play at Oklahoma State and at Kansas State. And, in the Big 12, in big time football, I'd really like to see Houston revamp and maybe take control of the Southeast, at least part of the state. Because right now, I mean, they're just not landing a lot of their recruits.
Right. And I don't disagree with that. And I think the next part to your question of which of those 4 teams would have the most success in the Big 12 more than just football, I think that would be Houston. I think Houston's going to benefit on the basketball side and in some of these other non-revenue sports or some of those others that are there. I also think that Sonny Dykes did a great marketing strategy once he came on board at TCU. And he immediately started saying TCU is DFW's Power 5 team or Big 12 school or however we say that. So I think playing along with what you're saying, he's thinking the same thing about Houston coming in. So yes, Houston area has a lot of great high school recruits out of there, but so does Dallas Fort Worth. So let's concentrate our message on we're going to go after these DFW recruits. Geographically, he's still working with a bigger area than Houston. So, okay, yes, we'll probably still pay some attention to Houston, but Houston, you can still take some of that area, but we're going to concentrate up here.
Yeah, and how fun of a regional rivalry is that going to be within the Lone Star State between you can finally pit the DFW area versus the Houston area, because it's been a long time since TCU and Houston have been on equal footing, at least in the football scape here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see who can pull the biggest recruits because, yeah, Houston is a hotbed for recruiting, but yeah, DFW, it's right up there with it as, that and Miami-Dade maybe is the hottest, maybe in Southern California, as the hottest recruiting hotbeds in the entire country. I'm really excited for that. I honestly think, and I'm very sorry to the American fans out there and the Group of 5 fans out there, but I don't see any downside to these 4 teams moving up into the Big 12 and making it a lot more competitive. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So
exactly.
I want to, yeah.
I think the one thing I'm going to say, I think those 4 teams are very happy that they took action when they did. That they're settled in for now, and now we're back to the next wave, which I know we're going to talk about later. But that you have all these other rumors of what's the next thing to happen. They're already at least settled into the Power 5 and can sit back and watch it happen. So I think good timing for them. Good timing for the Big 12. It saved the Big 12. So the Big 12 is not worrying about being dissolved. Makes it good for all of us.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to even say that these 4 teams, let's just pick UCF out of the group and say UCF, I think right now is better positioned than Georgia Tech, than Indiana, than Cal or Stanford, because they're secure, because they're recently recruited and they're recently desired to be in, if it does get to a point where the Power 5 breaks away and is the new hierarchy, I guess, in college football, and the rest of the teams kind of fall back, it was kind of that scramble for a bit. Are you in the Big 12 or Big 10? Or are you in the SEC? Because those are going to be the new super conferences, which is to be seen. I don't know if that'll necessarily be the case, but I think these 4 teams are more comfortable in the spot that they're in than Washington State, than potentially even Illinois and schools like that or Boston College that might be on that fringe of, is my current conference wanting to keep me in the future? And I think for these 4 teams, the Big 12 said emphatically, yes, like we want you. And I think it's too big of a conference with too many heavy hitters to leave these 4 schools behind. So that's getting really ahead, but I think you have to be comforted if you're a fan of these schools or an administrator or an athlete of these schools to know that, like, yeah, we're part of the future plans of major college football.
Yep.
All right, so I just want to touch on it. We won't go nearly as in depth in these other moves. I just want to put them out there. The American Conference is adding 6 teams. They are adding Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, North Texas, which does apply to the DFW area, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. They're taking them all from Conference USA, basically taking the bulk of that conference over to the American, which has been a competitive conference, but it just lost Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, and less recently and less importantly for football, but UConn. And we will get to UConn. We'll have a conversation about UConn here shortly, but I think a lot of this has to do with TV markets. You're getting Charlotte, Miami, Fort Worth, and you're basically retaining Houston, even if it's a smaller school. And it's also an academics thing for Rice. They're one of the nationally renowned, prestigious academic institutions. So I see the case for that. I think it's great. Conference USA just lost their last 6 conference champions among these teams. And a lot more conference runners up, particularly UTSA, who is in the hype. But there's a lot of Texas in this. So it kind of went from Texas being the Big 12 and Conference USA to now being the Big 12, soon kind of be the SEC with their 2 biggest brands, and the American. So any thoughts on this secondary wave?
Well, I think 3-4 years ago, if you looked at that group of 5, a group of 5 was a group of 5 was a group of 5. But I think now we've created a hierarchy. And I think if you have dreams of that Power 5 eventually, you got to go to the American to get there. And if you want to go to the American to get there, you got to spend some time in Conference USA. So you might start in the Sun Belt or the MAC, and then that's your next move is Conference USA, and then you're going to move on to the American, and maybe one day then you'll be able to go play with the big boys. I think that's what we've now created. I think from a Power 5 perspective, we can talk about the big changes that are there. We know it's the Texas and the Oklahoma and the USC and the UCLA, but to think about what are all the changes on the group of 5, I can't keep up with that. I looked at this list. I'm like, okay, I forgot about that. And even just watching some baseball this past season, TCU played a few of those teams. And I think it was when we were playing UTSA, they were talking about the move. I didn't realize they were moving. Okay, didn't even realize they were in Conference USA. Now they're moving. So it's just kind of hard to keep up with.
Yeah, I do like, though, that we are losing a lot of regional identity in college football. And it will continue to de-regionalize, at least in the major conferences and the major programs. But we're also gaining more regional rivalries like North Texas, SMU. Now they don't have to schedule an out-of-conference game to play each other. You are getting that cross-metro rivalry happening in conference, and I really like that. You are keeping the ties with Houston. You are now gaining ties to San Antonio, which UTSA – all-around athletic program. Outstanding. I mean, they're killing it on the football front. Jeff Traylor, one of the best upcoming college football coaches. He's been locked in, I'll say with air quotes around that, because, what does a coaching contract actually mean? But he at least doubled down on his allegiance to San Antonio. And UTSA's baseball program this year has just been absolutely killing it. So I think it was a nice grab for them. I like to see these new kind of regional rivals. UAB, who knows what they're doing with their football program moving forward, and then getting, it's not so bad if you're an SMU fan to have to travel to Boca Raton to go watch your Mustangs play in basically paradise. So there's some nice additions there. Charlotte's upcoming. We'll see what happens with them, but, I just want to touch on that. Conference USA is replacing with what they can. They're adding Liberty, a nice independent program who's seen a lot of success lately. Interested to see what direction they go in after they lose Hugh Freeze to Auburn. They hired Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina, who's had a lot of success in Myrtle Beach there. And he brought along basically the whole staff. So we'll see how Liberty goes. They added New Mexico State. Historically awful, but interesting, I think, for 2023. They have a fun quarterback. And Jerry Kill, who was a former Big 12 rival for a hot second at Texas Tech, has just revitalized programs. So we'll see what New Mexico State does. They're also adding 2 FCS schools. Again, more. Go ahead. Yeah, go
ahead. And Jerry Kill came in last year at the end of the 2021 season, took over for TCU when Patterson was gone.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And led them to some wins. Like they didn't totally fall apart. So right. Exactly. The Baylor upset. Yeah. Jerry Kill, long-term success there. In terms of the FCS teams that they're bringing up, Jacksonville State, not actually in Jacksonville, Florida. That's in Jacksonville, Alabama, just to clear that up. And Sam Houston State, which just recently won an FCS national championship in 2021. I'm going to say it was the 2020 year, but it was the delayed COVID year in the spring of 21. So Conference USA, maybe not in the position they want to be right now. They're kind of led by Western Kentucky. Liberty immediately becomes one of the most successful programs in that conference. And you're talking about Middle Tennessee. That's kind of where we're at with Conference USA. We'll see if they can pick up the pieces. Sam Houston State, I think, becomes immediately viable as well. So any final thoughts on Conference USA or the American?
So with Liberty and New Mexico State moving, BYU moving where they're going, are we down to just Notre Dame and Army for the independents?
It is Notre Dame. It is Army. It is UConn, who is still independent, and UMass, who I forget is a football program sometimes too. No shade to all the Minutemen diehards that are listening to us today. All maybe 4 of you. It's fine. They came up to the FBS at a wrong time. They were doing fine in the FCS. They finally get to over 500. They get, maybe a little greedy jump up there. Haven't been able to find their footing. But yeah, those are your 4 left. And we'll see how long Notre Dame goes, since Notre Dame kind of feels like the next domino to fall in conference realignment. And I do want to talk about the next dominoes to fall, the specific ones that we know in 2024. This is not happening this year, but even though it's less numerous, this is quite possibly more impactful and larger and important, the 2024 conference realignment. This is the year Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12. They're going to the SEC, and that's that. We know it's happening. It's objectively a gigantic financial loss for the Big 12. However, no longer will Big 12 offseason previews pit Texas and Oklahoma in their conference championship. And if you read my recent conference champion predictions, I do have Texas there. For laughs, of course. But, I think with their departure, the Big 12 becomes a more competitive league annually from top to bottom. However, you are losing several $100 million in revenue a year. What was your original reaction when you saw the news that these two Big 12, Big 8, Heartland of America powerhouses were leaving the conference?
I felt hurt. And part of that was the Chris Del Conte connection, the athletic director at Texas, and his role that he had previously had at TCU, having had gone through that roller coaster of the conferences, and he's the one that got us into the Big 12. And so I think all of us just kind of felt that hurt, like a stab in the back. Yes, they bring in a lot of revenue. Yes, they are the marquee names in the league. Yes, this does change the personality of the league, the reputation of the league. But at the end of the day, after you get over that initial shock and anger, I think it's like, okay, we're going to be okay. And we're going to be okay because I do think it makes the Big 12 more competitive. It makes us all find that new rival and that new way to build the conference. So yes, I was shocked, I was hurt, but it's time to move on. And if that's what they choose to do, that's fine. From a personal perspective, I don't like it. And that's just because of my family connection. I like the fact that we're playing Sooners once a year and then more than that in other sports. And, I might still cheer for the Sooners in every game other than when they play TCU most of the time. But to have that opportunity for us as a family to celebrate that, not every year, and that's going to be hard, but that's okay. We'll get past that. So,
I mean, it was a major reminder to everybody that college athletics is still a business, and it's becoming more businessy, as we'll get into soon. but this isn't the first, and it surely isn't and hasn't been the last of major dominoes to move. And, I completely understand the standpoint of feeling, upset and hurt that Del Conte would take Texas away. For all intents and purposes, nice guy. I've met him. He's really great with the fans, and he made the business decision. But Del Conte was the man to move Texas to the SEC. But we all know who's running the show at Texas. Longhorn fans know who's running the show. It's not Del Conte. It's not it's the boosters. It's the multi tens of millions of dollars billionaire boosters, right? That are calling those shots. Now, once they make the exit, once they're gone, project 5, 7, 8 years down the road, where do you think TCU fits in the conference? If you had to maybe tier it or think of a placement, where does TCU fit in the post Texas and OU Big 12?
That's a good question. I think TCU has taken full advantage of the 11 years of being in the conference. One, from a performance standpoint, whether that be on the football field or in other sports. But because of that, and because of the Big 12 revenue, TCU has taken full advantage of that from a facility standpoint. Facilities then leads to better recruiting. So what TCU has today in terms of facilities is so much better than what we had when we left the Southwest Conference. So I don't know that every other Big 12 school can say that. So I think that alone is going to help us move forward. What we talked about a few minutes ago about being in DFW with recruiting, that's going to help us. So will we remain top tier in there will we become the top tier without OU in Texas? Possibly. I don't know. But I don't think we're going to be at the bottom part of that. So definitely top half. So I'm okay with that. I had an interesting conversation just this afternoon with a TCU alum that I hadn't seen in a long time. And we were talking about what does this do to rivalries? And specifically, we were talking about how the regular season of the baseball, Big 12 baseball turned out, and having to face Kansas State. And it was basically winner of that series gets the number 4 seed in the tournament and hopefully on to postseason. But we were talking about Kansas State, and Kansas State has quietly really developed a great program, whether it be football, basketball, baseball. So Kansas State is doing a good job of moving up to that, wanting to be the top tier. And why not make Kansas State be the one that TCU needs to be worried about and have that be a nice purple versus purple rivalry? I think the problem there is that Kansas State fans are just too nice, and TCU fans still have an anger toward Baylor, so we're always going to have that rival. So
yeah, I mean, I appreciate the humbleness, I suppose, to not just come out right and say TCU's top tier. I will be the one to come out, and you can see my allegiances behind me. I am not I'm not a TCU alumni. I am not a lifelong TCU fan. I absolutely love the Frogs because I've been working with the best people that also love the Frogs. I'm from Ohio. I'm an Ohio State fan, as you can see. TCU, I really think, is the best positioned of the Big 12 schools to be the big fish in the Big 12. And you're absolutely right. Kansas State has built a heck of an athletic program all the way around, making the right coach, mostly the right coaching hires is the way that they've done. I'm interested to see what happens. And I could be speaking out of pure ignorance. And if there are people that are really plugged in with the Kansas State program that can come out and say, no, you're wrong, here's the proof, please do, because I'm interested. I'm interested to know what happens when the big bag shows up at Chris Kleiman's door. And I don't mean from Kansas State. I mean from Texas post Steve Sarkisian or Oklahoma post Brent Venables. What happens when that gigantic power comes and says, you're really good at your job. Here is generational wealth for you and your family. How would you like to come be a part of LSU? How would you like to be a part of, South Carolina or a giant school that can throw bags of money at them. Now, Bill Snyder stayed home forever and had Kansas State a decades-long formidable football program. So maybe that's not the case. But I don't think that's going to be the case at TCU. You don't see big programs coming in and pulling names away from TCU. To leave TCU, you get shown the door because you didn't perform. It's too big a city. It's too big a brand. It's too big a program for these coaches to be hired away. So that's why I think TCU is established in its place as a major contributor and competitor in the Big 12, because it's just too big a city. It's too big a market. It's too big an athletic program to have those guys plucked away. And I mean, the TCU athletic program has the money to be able to keep those guys in place should they need to. We'll see with Sonny Dykes here in the next 3 to 5 years as people start. I'm sure Arkansas, if Sam Pittman finds a different place, or Kentucky or Tennessee, one of those bigger schools, to come over and knock on the door and say, hey, Sonny Dykes, we're interested in you. So I don't think they're going to be able to do that. But just to touch on the other 2024 schools, USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten. That was, I think, the move that de-regionalized college football. Texas and Oklahoma are still kind of in that SEC-ish footprint. It kind of makes sense. USC and UCLA makes no sense, along with Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, and the likes. You now have a Big Ten team on each.
I'm really looking forward. I'm looking forward to that UCLA-Rutgers rivalry.
I can't wait for UCLA or USC to have to go play at Rutgers in November at night when it's 42 degrees and raining. Let's see the Trojans play in that kind of weather, or play at Michigan State November 16th when there's 4 inches of snow on the ground. Good luck, Lincoln Riley and crew. You haven't had to do that before. There's a lot of discussion to be had on that. I don't know if it's necessarily an appropriate discussion for here and now. We'll certainly tackle that in the future. Again, I have allegiances to the Big Ten, so I have opinions on it. I kind of want to keep this focus more on the Big 12 and Big 12 adjacent. And then not to be overshadowed by these 4 historic, major, successful programs. Kennesaw State moves up to the FBS to become its 134th member in 2024. So
on that note, there is the only thing I can say about Kennesaw State is, for you and for Andrew that we talked about earlier with College Football Tour, you two are on this quest to have a game day experience at every FBS stadium. And now that goalpost just keeps getting moved and moved and moved. And I know Andrew's a lot closer than you are, but he went from 131 now to, there's 3 more I need to get to. So
and more coming, because the rumor mill is abound with speculation with Tarleton State could move up from D2 to FCS to FBS within 10 years. It's something that never ends. So, if I have to visit Kennesaw, Georgia, I'd be more than happy to. I've seen pictures of the stadium. It looks lovely. So, I did want to touch on really quick some rumors and connections with conference realignment. I know we've been really long-winded about this. There is a lot to unpack. The Pac-12 is trying to raid other places potentially. San Diego State sounds like it's almost a given. Is what it is. SMU has been frequently brought up, and it kind of seems like every time that they're brought up, it leads to a very swift and immediate dead end. And those kind of reports and rumors, to me, and again, this is just a gut feeling, I don't have insight, I don't have insiders info, but usually when I see a report that ends to a very swift and soon dead end, those things usually turn out to be true. And so SMU, the Pac-12, could be a thing. And now all of a sudden, you have 2 quote-unquote Power 5 programs in the Metroplex. And we've seen SMU recruit very well. They just, re-landed a commitment from their old commit, Jordan Hudson, who couldn't find a spot on the TCU roster not too long ago. How about this? Let me say it this way. If SMU had to move up to one or the other, would you like to see them come into the Big 12 and form this cross-conference rivalry? Or would you like to see them go to the Pac-12 where you keep the non-conference if you need to, and maybe they're recruiting a different set of players?
They're not going to come to the Big 12, and that's because, and I think you've hit on it already. It's the TV market. what does SMU add to a Big 12 from a TV perspective?
Well,
Nothing.
maybe not a split metroplex, because you can have allegiances. I mean, I used to live in Fort Worth as well. For all the listeners, I lived in Fort Worth for a while. And when people from back home in Cleveland said, "Oh, you live in Dallas," I said, "No, I live in Fort Worth." And there's a very clear divide culturally and regionally between the two, even if the metroplexes themselves bleed into each other. Is it possible that if they both join the Big 12, that there would be a very hard split on TV market? You know better than I would.
Yeah, I think there is. It's possible. I think higher ups that aren't at the university level are probably looking at that and saying SMU doesn't add anything to the Big 12. We don't need them in the Big 12. Sure, and they would add a lot to the Pac-12 just from that perspective, getting a top 5 media market into their footprint. So that I could see benefit with. I think the bigger thing to ask though is when and if SMU goes to the Pac-12, what does that Pac-12 look like? And is that Pac-12 is it a Power 5, or is it back down now to a G5 status because we've lost perhaps Oregon and Washington, or perhaps the 4 corner states to have come into the Big 12? So yes, I mean, it's interesting to say SMU to the Pac-12, but I'm just a little leery of what the future of the Pac-12 looks like.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And one other name I want to throw out that does have to do with the Big 12 itself. Again, this is rumors, this is speculation. It kind of makes a lot of sense. UConn. They're an independent right now. They're up for grabs. They were actually run out of the American Conference. The American Conference says, "We don't want you here." And that was mostly football driven. You know, they're free agents. In UConn plays in the Big East in basketball. So the American doesn't have ties there. They didn't before. And they also play in the Big East in baseball. And they have a good baseball program. Not super terrific this year, but historically and recently, they've been very good. Now, that is why the Big 12 would expand them. It's not regional. It's not because of football prowess, even though they made their first bowl game in several years recently. Do you think that UConn would be a good fit? We've heard about Gonzaga recently, just on a basketball basis. And the Big 12 is really good at basketball. Do you think UConn would be a good fit in the Big 12?
I think it adds something to the West Virginia, Cincinnati rivalry section of the Big 12. Gives another team sort of in that direction. I mean, I realize we're still hundreds of miles away, but still a lot closer than, say, Texas. So I think that is kind of interesting. I would put that in context with the rumors that are out there more recently of what's happening with the ACC and the Big Ten, and does the AC, and I know there's a lot of grant of rights that goes to 2034 or something crazy like that with the ACC, that an ACC split up is probably inevitable just from a legal perspective. But if there's these 7 schools at the ACC that are trying to pull away, what does that do to the Big 12, and where does UConn fall into that? And what happens with the Big 10? And I think it's a bigger picture than, does the Big 12 expand east and add in a UConn and maybe some of these other from the ACC, or does the Big 12 expand west and grab the 4 corner states and even perhaps an Oregon and Washington, because the Big 10 now doesn't want them because they got a Clemson and a Florida State or something along those lines. So I don't really know, but I wouldn't put UConn by themselves. I would group them with some of these other discussions and rumors.
What if I told you that Hartford, Connecticut is 30? Let me phrase it this way. What if I told you Cincinnati was only 30 minutes further away from Stillwater, Oklahoma than it was Hartford, Connecticut?
Okay. That's
It's
interesting.
it's
Okay.
it is the de-regionalization of college football. It just kind of
Yeah.
is what it is. And that sucks because the regions have these identities. The Pac-12 has its own football identity. The Big 12 has its football identity. The Big 10 has its own thing. ACC, SEC, America, the MAC has one of the best, I think, college football identities in the nation. Not just saying that because I am a MAC grad from Bowling Green, but it's true. And it kind of sucks to see that go out the window. So, but it is a train that is moving that we cannot stop and will not stop no matter how much I pray and hope that it does stop. So if you're thinking about just from a business perspective, I think UConn joining the Big 12 makes a lot of sense. They would be the punching bag and Kansas would no longer be the perennial bottom feeder. It would be UConn for a long time.
Unless, like what you said, unless a Gonzaga came in for basketball only.
Yeah, well,
But
for sure.
put,
Yeah, I do
put,
think
put it,
football
put,
would come with it, though, because I think they want
yeah,
baseball
no,
too for UConn.
okay. But I'm just saying, imagine just a basketball league with a Kansas, a Gonzaga,
Ooh.
and a UConn in it.
Jeez. Yeah. Good luck. Good luck, everybody, winning any sort of games. So from a TCU perspective, from a TCU basketball perspective, you better hope they don't come over because that's going to be it's going to be a heck of a conference to compete in.
I'll take Gonzaga coming over as long as Drew Timme finally graduates.
I think he is done. I could be wrong, but I believe he is done. So there's a lot to unpack with college football realignment. You brought up the what they call the Magnificent Seven, I believe they're calling them, the ACC. That whole can of worms, we haven't even touched that because there's just so much going on, and that'll be something that we will unpack as the offseason progresses, as the season grows near. Honestly, probably through the season. June is a big moving month for teams, it seems. So maybe we'll get breaking news that we'll have to jump in about and talk about in a future episode here, but. I mean, the basic headline that impacts TCU the most, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF are coming over to the Big 12. I think we're both kind of in the same step that, yeah, it's good for the conference. I think we're excited for it, excited to see new and revived rivalries. And for those that travel with the TCU program, you get to see some new amazing college football stadiums and college towns.
Right.
So we are running a lot longer than I thought, which is great. There's a lot to talk about. I hope everyone listening has maybe learned something or at least enjoyed us. For now, we do have two more topics, and I want to kind of breeze through them at this point. Again, these will be topics that we talk to death about. It's topics everyone's talked to death about, but I want to hear your perspective of it, and I do want to talk about them. And the next one is name, image, likeness, NIL. They're the famous three words that get people really, really worked up. There's moral debates behind it. There's legal debates. It's a lot of stuff you can get into. Everyone has their opinions. Nothing I say is going to change anybody's opinions. So I want to stray away from the opinion side. How did we get here? This is a great question. And I think if you take a singular example of how big this has become, a name, Jaden Rashada, that people may or may not be familiar with. If you're just a big TCU fan, that may be a new name to you. If you follow college football as a whole, you definitely know where I'm going with this. And he was a quarterback, high star recruit from, I believe he's Rashada. Arizona. I'm probably wrong with that. Regardless, he was originally committed to Florida, and he had a rumored $13 million NIL deal that reportedly fell through. So he decommits from Florida and he goes to Arizona State with no NIL deal, reportedly. Now, that's one of those things where, was the $13 million real? Was that even a real number? Was it not even a hoax or anything, but like, was Florida, the collective, over promising, any of that kind of stuff? Now, it doesn't really seem to have consolidated recruiting like there was a lot of fears of. It's going to be, oh, here we go. Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, they're all going to get, the rich are going to get richer. The SEC is going to overcome. But, interestingly, Louisville, Texas Tech, Illinois, Utah, Oregon State, South Carolina, Arkansas, they all signed their best recruiting classes in the past 5 years this past season. UCF and Colorado also did the same thing. for different reasons. UCF is coming up to Big 12. Colorado got Deion Sanders. And a lot of these teams, Illinois, Texas Tech, Oregon State, have had some of the best years that they've had recently. But what it has affected TCU both positively and negatively is the transfer portal. And you're seeing a lot of these group of 5 guys come out to Power Fives because they're getting NIL deals. But, what are your overall thoughts? And I guess we'll start from a TCU specific standpoint on how NIL has affected the program. And are you worried about where it's leading to?
I'm definitely worried about where the whole NIL programs or ideas leading to. It's a mess. It's a wild, wild west out there. And it should have been thought of over a decade ago of how to handle this. And it could have been handled cleanly. Now you've got 50 different state legislatures that are coming up with 50 different sets of rules, and therefore making it even not as fair or competitive as to what you can do in Alabama and Oklahoma versus what you can do in Texas. So there's that. I think on the TCU perspective, it's interesting in that there hasn't been a lot of big announcements or big money deals or something, but yet it doesn't seem to have been hurting from a recruiting perspective or a transfer portal perspective. So is it happening just more quietly, or what's going on there? Now, there's also been some issues with several of the NIL groups that were working with TCU students have come and gone over the last year. The collectives that were out there. So now it seems to all be consolidating behind the Flying T Club and the Flying T Club's relationship to the Frog Club, whose relationship to TCU athletics, and how does that all mesh? And so hopefully something's happening there that's keeping these players involved. I was impressed a couple weeks ago when we learned that Andy Dalton was stepping up and putting some money towards 450 something student athletes at TCU. So he's looking beyond football and seeing how he himself can help. So maybe that's what's going to get us there. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the Wild West is the ultimate word for it. And to be clear, I think it's a good thing from the standpoint of coaches can leave whenever the heck they want. So if you say coaches can leave, player mobility is a good thing. However, like you said, this should have been thought about a decade ago. They should have had more concrete things in place. And I know the NCAA is about as effective in policing things as the British monarchy is in their country. They are a figurehead. They're there to say, look, we have this. They're ineffective. They don't affect the law all that much, right, anymore.
Right.
So I'd like to see some sort of governing body kind of step up and put some things in there, some rules in place, because you have a Florida collective promising a young man $13 million. And maybe that was total BS. Or maybe it was real and fell through. And, it's just, I don't get it. And the thing with TCU specifically is it's kind of tough to gauge where they stand in that NIL perspective, because we don't hear a lot about it. Even, us that cover it, we don't hear a lot about it.
Right.
But it's hard to gauge because they did just come off of being national runners up. And, it's the Doug Flutie effect. You see it not only just in athlete, in recruiting, but you see in student enrollment that when a football program does really well in the next few years, they have a huge spike in applications. I know TCU is a smaller school, so it probably affects it proportionately differently, but you're going to have athletes that want to be a part of this program, especially year one under Sonny Dykes. They made this incredible run. Now there's a lot of holes on the roster where guys are wanting to step in and play. And, they've gotten some big time, big power school transfers coming in, which is great. I think we'll see where TCU stands in that NIL perspective, specifically when Texas and Oklahoma depart, number one. And two, when, sorry to the fans who don't want to hear this, but we can put some distance between TCU and being national runners up. And who knows? Maybe we won't have that. Maybe TCU will be nationally competitive year after year, and that's great. And that will certainly help transfers. But I wonder if it's more about, hey, they just did really well. I want to go be a part of something special under this year one of a coach. Or if it is, they have a strong NIL perspective. I don't know if we're going to know the answer to that for some time. But, NIL's out there. The good player mobility is fine, and it brings us the NCAA video game, which I'm very excited for. And the negative is no one knows what's going on, and it's completely unlegislated. So, I guess we'll find out moving forward. Just wanted to touch on it really quick. Do you have any final parting thoughts about it?
I think it's just going to be an interesting ride. See where the next couple of years take us, and what happens. Hopefully, it settles itself down in that time.
I agree. Okay, another thing that gets people really hot and bothered, or they're fully behind it, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it, the expanded college football playoff. The pros, more teams are involved and allegedly competitive. The cons, it turns the Rose Bowl into a quarterfinal game, which really, really irks me. And I know as a TCU fan, and some of the greatest moments in TCU football history is the Rose Bowl, and now all of a sudden it's quarterfinal. I hate that. I don't know about you.
I agree.
God, that's just bad. But anyway, the rundown. We're going from 4 teams to 12. I think everyone by this point knows that. We're not breaking news. We're not early to the party here. The top 4 conference champions, they are the top 4 seeds. They get a bye. So you see years where Alabama and Georgia are both making the college football playoff. Only one of them is going to get a bye. The other ones will be relegated to the at-large seeds. Then we're going to get an auto bid for the next top 6 conference champions. And then the rest of the 6 seeds are at-large bids. When we say top 6 conference champions, yes, that includes the top group of 5 or the top 2 group of 5 champions, depending on the year. Maybe the ACC and the Pac-12 have a down year, and all of a sudden the Sun Belt, which we saw, with Troy being really good, or UTSA in the American, or Tulane recently, can jump up there and get one of those top 6 auto bids. The College Football Playoff Committee, they're still choosing at larges, so we're still going to argue about stuff. And the thing I think I'm most excited for, and I want to hear your thoughts about it, the first round playoff games are coming to campuses. We're playing them on campus. What do you think about that?
I think that's great. I like that. I like that part. I totally agree with you about the Rose Bowl, and it all of a sudden is not the granddaddy of them all anymore. But yes, in a win and advance, one more opportunity for your student sections to do what they do. Okay, I'm fine with that. So we do it in baseball, we do it in other sports as well. So, why not? Let's see what happens and go with that. My concern on this whole thing is, okay, we had 4 teams in the college football playoff, and all of a sudden four teams was not enough. We need to expand. Okay, now we're expanding. We're at 12. Okay, now we need, 12 is not enough because now we're missing on this. So do we need to go to 16? Where do we stop? So I think I'm concerned on that. Maybe 8 was a number better than 12, but I don't know. So what I don't want to see is, okay, you've got 6 auto bids to conferences, and then you have 6 at-larges. And are all those 6 at-larges going to be SEC and Big Ten? That's the case. They could be. And so what have we gained? So.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be plenty of debates around, 3 years into this thing. 70% of the at-large bids have been either from the SEC or the Big Ten. And especially with teams,
right, exactly.
With those 4 power programs moving conferences, you're probably going to get more of that because UCLA is here to stay, or I'm sorry, USC is here to stay as a power program as long as Lincoln Riley's in town. And Oklahoma is going to continue to be good, and Texas is going to continue to at least be in the preseason conversation. When they aren't. So, and I don't want to leave UCLA out because Chip Kelly's been doing a great job out there as well, taking a talent that doesn't care about college football and turning them good. But I totally get it. 8, in my opinion, would have been better, at least as a stepping stone. If you get to 8, and you're really like, you know what, this really isn't doing it, then maybe you can go to 12. I get it. It's, I really like the FCS playoffs. I really do. I think they're terrific.
Right.
But the FCS isn't rooted in this, I think, incredible bowl setup. There is nothing, in my opinion, like bowl season. I actually prefer
absolutely.
I prefer the bowls over the college football playoff. I'd rather watch the Radiance Technologies Independence Bowl over a college football playoff game most years. I just do. That's the kind of football fan I am. So I'm sad to see the bowl structure. It's not going by the wayside. It is still definitely there, but it's like we said, the Rose Bowl is no longer the granddaddy of them all. It is no longer a spectacle. Some years it'll be a semifinal, and that's fine. That's great. Georgia, Oklahoma was one of the best semifinals we've ever had, and it took place in the Rose Bowls. Great.
Right.
But when I see a quarterfinal where Alabama beats the brakes off of, this year's MAC contestant that wins 12 games in the Rose Bowl, that's really great for the student athletes. I used to recruit for Bowling Green, and one of our recruiting pitches was that Bowling Green was going to play at UCLA, and they did that this year. And our recruiting pitch to these athletes were, dude, when you're a junior, you're going to get to play in the Rose Bowl. And it worked. A lot of people were really excited about that. We were the first ever MAC team to play in a Rose Bowl. But now when Central Michigan wins, 12 games under Burt Emanuel Jr., who, by the way, if you don't know who that is, go look up my recent article on college football long shots. Incredible freaking player. When they win 12 games and they go to the Rose Bowl and they play Georgia, who just so happened to not win the SEC that year. Maybe LSU got him. Maybe Alabama got him. And they had to play Georgia. I don't want to watch that game. Not in the Rose Bowl. So I have my concerns about it. That does kind of suck. But, again, it's another one of those things that are inevitable. The thing I do like is it does kind of return the New Year's Day and New Year's Eve format back to it. Like that's kind of the marquee, quarterfinal day. I believe it's it's quarterfinals, because semifinals, they're moving to Thursday and Friday. Hope you didn't have any high school football playoffs you're going to watch in Texas, which is a big thing because, they're doing that so they don't compete with the NFL.
Well, but that high school football is done by Christmas, so we're good there.
Oh yeah, I guess it would. Yeah. So Texas. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So so good. So then we'll keep our Friday night football. Fair enough. Yeah. No, you're right. It is. Okay. Well, maybe I'm more okay with that than I was. It's fine. People are off of work by then. So, I guess my final question for you on this, and kind of my final question for you on our first podcast here, do you think that the expanded college football playoff is going to even out the competitive balance, or are we still going to see the same 3 to 4 teams in the playoffs in the semifinals every year?
I think we have to wait and see, but I'm leery that it's going to be any different.
Yeah, I feel similarly. It was great watching TCU upset Michigan this year. They were 6.5, 7-point underdogs. It was a fantastic game, and seeing that new face in the championship, which I don't think they ever played that. I think they canceled the game, but that seeing them win that is great. And yes, you can say that's going to happen. Sometimes if you look at the overall college football playoff semifinals, it's an average spread of 24.5 points at the end of the game. And Alabama is beating the brakes off of Washington, and they hold Michigan State to 0 points. So when you see these new teams getting in there, it's really exciting, and we get really excited for it. But who knows? I am a bit leery. I think leery is a good word for it. So, boy, all right. This was our first episode, and I think it was great. Barry, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for listening, for tuning into the first Killer Frogs college football podcast. You can find us at KillerFrogs.com. You can find my articles on KillerFrogs.com. You can find Barry's articles there, too. And every article that's not written by him, his eyes have seen. He is our editor-in-chief here. You can find us on Twitter at KillerFrogs. I am at Road to CFB. And you can find Barry at Barry R. Lewis. You can continue our conversation here over on Facebook. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you're using. And if you really liked what you heard, drop us a 5-star review, because this is going to help us grow. It's going to help us reach more college football fans and other folks. And I'm really excited for that. And before I send everybody off, Barry, I want to close this thing out with a bang. I want to hear one big prediction for the 2023 college football season. Dig your heels in and make a stand. What is it?
I think I've already alluded to this, if you hadn't picked up on it. Back-to-back Big 12 purple teams in the national championship game, and it's not TCU.
Oh, my goodness.
Kansas State.
Oh, my goodness. We're talking about football. Yes. I love it.
Yes.
That's a bold prediction. Okay, so
you said bold.
That is bold. Yeah, no doubts there. So if you heartily disagree with Barry, then you have to leave us a review and tell us why, or tweet at us or something. I think that's great, but I don't know. I think everybody's going to agree with that. Kansas State, wow, that is awesome. I would love to see that. Chris Kleiman, what an amazing story that would be. Okay, yeah, everyone check back.
What's yours?
I can't. Oh, I have to give that now. I don't know how bold this is, but I think UCF has a real chance to win the Big 12. I am a betting man. I do that for a living. I am a college football betting writer, and I think UCF, I did bet on UCF to win the Big 12 as a flyer on the future. I think they're a really good team with a really nice quarterback that they're bringing back. And yeah, I mean this year.
Your article that you wrote on Long Shots for Every Conference, that's who you picked. So you're holding to that too.
I will stand on the table as that. I also love Riley Leonard. I rebranded us, whether you realize it or not, as a Riley Leonard fan club for Duke, the quarterback. So pulling them for the ACC as well. Maybe a Heisman contender.
There you
go. So those are a couple of bold predictions. But check back next week. We will be back here with more episodes. We're going to be talking about everything this offseason. We've got a lot to cover. We've got conference previews. We've got team previews. We're going to do a whole thing on a TCU team preview for 2024, which those that have listened to us for a long time know I nail every year when I said that TCU was a 6-win team in 2022. So check back for more of that. We'll be back here next week. I'm Brett Gibbons. That is Barry Lewis, and we'll catch you all next time.